All right, folks, in our first story of the day, we're going to be talking about a story published by ABC7 Chicago. It's a follow-up expose that was published on August 16th, 2025. A little bit behind on news, took a little bit of a break, but that's why we're bringing it to you here live on the show. Be sure to subscribe to the show at colememo.com/subscribe if you haven't already, to never miss a news update. Once again, this was a follow-up expose by ABC7 Chicago, where they reported that Injustice Watch, who I believe is an outlet, unveiled fresh evidence of fake science at the University of Illinois Chicago's now closed analytical forensic testing laboratory. And this is all following the initial investigative coverage by ABC7's I-Team. So we might show you that report here in a little bit. You might be familiar with it. This is not the first report on this lab. And we'll, like I say, talk about that a little bit more. So the documents obtained through internal memos and emails suggest that the lab produced unreliable THC test results, specifically failing to differentiate Delta-9 THC, which many people refer to as the intoxicating form, regulated under Illinois DUI law, from other compounds. So they weren't able to differentiate the compounds, a problem that allegedly was known to lab personnel as early as 2021. And these inaccuracies, according to the reporting, have cast doubt on thousands of cannabis-related DUI convictions, prompting police and prosecutors across the Chicago metro area to reassess potentially affected cases. Some, like in DuPage County, have already been dismissed. Some of this might sound really familiar because last year I talked about exactly this. ABC7, they did break a story related to this lab, but it was not related to the subject matter we're discussing today, or that we'll be reporting on today. They first did some reporting on December 5th, 2024, regarding some of the flawed results, and I believe that had to do with blood. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the flawed results with urine, and to do that, I'm going to give a quick background on what a per se limit is. And in order to do that, I'm going to play a clip from the podcast in the past, episode 97, where we covered exactly this topic. And let's take a look, see, and learn what is a per se limit. And then we're going to watch the findings. We're going to watch ABC7's findings on this UIC lab. Let's press play so that my face doesn't look like this any longer. That was shared with me. But before I do that, a little bit of background. In case you're wondering what a per se limit even is, let's talk about how it became a part of Illinois law. So in 2016, Illinois decriminalized small amounts of cannabis. Under the 2016 law, those caught up with up to 10 grams of marijuana faced fines of $100 to $200. Individual municipalities could add to the fines or implement other penalties, such as requiring offenders to attend drug treatment. I think some of those provisions still exist today. Citations were reportedly set to be automatically expunged twice a year on January 1st and July 1st. Individual municipalities could add to the fines or implement other penalties, such as requiring offenders to attend drug treatment. Once again, I believe we've seen that continue. I didn't mean to mention that twice, but it is important to mention that I believe the requirement to attend drug treatment is still required. If you would like to see at least one story I'm aware of where something like that was required, you can go to thecolememo.com/isitlegal. David's story, he got in trouble and was required to go to a sort of drug treatment. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it sounded like this. The 2016 law that we were just talking about also changed the state's zero tolerance policy for driving under the influence. In doing so, Illinois created a per se limit. A per se limit is the concept that allows the state to assume you're guilty of driving under the influence, even if the state is unable to prove impairment. In the past, Illinois Representative Bob Morgan has indicated that the Illinois threshold is arbitrary, saying, quote, "We literally made it up." Let's watch that clip before we go any further. I am about to share my screen for folks that are watching this version of the podcast, this episode of the podcast, rather.
There's still an element, and it continues to be a major problem of intoxication, driving while intoxicated with cannabis, because we don't have a .08, nor do we have technology to even enforce that if we did have any kind of standardization. So there's no per se limit. Illinois actually has a per se limit, but we literally made it up. We made up the per se limit. It's not based on 50, 60 years of driving while intoxicated with alcohol that we know .08 is the average. And yet we all know somebody who's 90 or 100 pounds who drinks one beer and can't drive. And we also know people who drink 12 packs and are just fine because the body absorbs alcohol differently. Same with cannabis. Some people that are regular users are not necessarily impaired, even if they're using quite a bit.
So, I mean, Illinois Representative Morgan said it himself. Some people could be, thought to be impaired, even though they're not. I've come under the understanding that these arbitrary thresholds have created complications for cannabis users in Illinois. That's why I started off the show saying if you use cannabis at all, you should be mindful of this. Particularly during traffic stops is when you need to be mindful of this. When you are operating the motor vehicle, many individuals find themselves being charged with intoxication despite not being impaired. From what I've been able to gather, beyond the low threshold levels, the real concern is the methodology that's practiced by one of the only labs in the state of Illinois that I've come to understand is certified to perform this type of testing in response to the change in the DUI statute in 2016. So let's pull up the presentation that I saw. Now, I'd like to reiterate, I saw this presentation. I didn't make this presentation. And so as a result, I'm going to be going through my notes. Okay, so you can check out that presentation. Really proud of it. I think I did a great job presenting on this subject. Again, that's episode 97 of the Cole memo, and this is where I actually broke some of the details on this. To be candid, it hasn't been until now that I've seen anybody else report on this specific subject matter. And so let's watch the report from ABC7. Before we do that, we are live, and so people are commenting, and I want to acknowledge their comments. You can also call into the show at colememo.com/live. But we've got some comments in, so let's take a look. So this comment says, "Yeah, court appointed and required programs are good money makers." Yeah. Like I say, if you go to colememo.com/isitlegal, it sounds like some of those court appointed programs are still required in some instances with cannabis related offenses, which seems interesting. Like, for example, the story that I referenced was a person that got in trouble for growing cannabis, which was their legal right as a medical cannabis patient, apparently, even though they got in trouble for it still. Like I say, very interesting story, but they were required to go to a substance abuse program. And it's like, hold on a second. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that in certain cases with alcohol, you might be required to go, for example, you might be required to go to a substance abuse program, but it just stood out to me as weird because growing cannabis doesn't, to me, indicate a substance abuse issue. It indicates a knack for growing plants, but that's maybe just my perspective. We got another comment in from our friend Penny Hartz. They say that clip that should be used to get any and all cannabis DUIs dismissed. And I believe they're referring to the one from Representative Morgan, who said, and I quote, the per se limit for cannabis, we literally made it up. That was the quote, which was, it's always super interesting to hear that clip. I like to play it a lot. Speaking of clips, let's watch this reporting. Like I say, this is the first time I've seen anybody report on these details. Take note of some of the names that are mentioned in this report. We're gonna dig into those names after we watch this report. Let's take a look.
Well over a year ago, the ABC7 team started digging into accusations of a lab scandal at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Our exclusive reporting uncovered serious questions about a likely flawed test that now has thousands of marijuana DUI convictions in question. Police and prosecutors are still scrambling, trying to determine which cases are damaged and which defendants may be wrongly locked up. And the fallout continues today as new evidence and accusations of fake science at the lab are coming to light.
I know that I was not under the influence that morning.
Corey Lee still sits behind bars, convicted of driving under the influence of cannabis. In 2018, he was involved in a crash in rural Illinois that killed a father and his adult son. Lee's case, along with many others, were charged based on blood test results from UIC's AFTL lab.
It's really simple. Fraudulent science equals fraudulent convictions. Step up to the plate, release the people that have been convicted based on this rogue lab, do the right thing.
After an extensive investigation by the I-Team, internal memos and emails revealed potentially flawed test results from the lab, generating inaccurate numbers of a cannabis molecule called THC. The tests were used to determine whether someone was illegally driving under the influence of marijuana. The lab was also accused in court filings of covering up the flaws in testing methods since 2021.
This is what I would describe as a festering scandal. The consequences are great. You know, there's people who are charged with felonies, their life is certainly affected.
Following our reporting, the DuPage County State's Attorney announced the dismissal of more than a dozen cases involving the faulty tests. Other county prosecutors and police departments in the metro Chicago area are now reviewing cases, including Cook County. Recently, the university's law firm released results of an internal investigation absolving the lab and UIC of wrongdoing, concluding the lab's methods were, quote, at all times appropriate and met accepted scientific standards, and that none of the analysts, quote, knowingly provided false testimony. But the report also says the lab's methods should have been modified to distinguish between two related forms of THC. Officials with UIC have repeatedly declined interviews or comment requests from the I-Team. ABC7's chief legal analyst says those investigation results are not an exoneration, especially with a key figure at the lab, Jennifer Bash, declining interviews by UIC's lawyers.
First, will there be a criminal penalty here? Will someone be found to have deliberately misled somebody else? Unclear from this report. It didn't find that someone had misled, but it also doesn't rule out that possibility, and I could see further inquiry there. The other question is, could somebody, the lab, be held liable in negligence for what happened here?
Now, the I-Team contacted forensic scientist Jennifer Bash, whose test methods at the lab and her testimony as an expert witness in many DUI cases are now being called into question. She declined an on-camera interview, but said in a written statement in part, quote, I was very disappointed when I read the article and saw it was filled with inconsistencies and falsehoods. Acting in good faith, I provided detailed responses to questions concerning the science behind the testing I conducted. Those responses have either been distorted or ignored. Throughout my career, I have presented facts based on sound scientific principles. While I understand that disagreement among experts is not uncommon in the courtroom, a differing scientific opinion should never be equated to dishonesty. The testing methods I used and the results obtained were scientifically sound, and I am unaware of any ANAB findings to the contrary. Bash is still certified by the American Board of Forensic Toxicology and can still testify in Illinois courtrooms. And joining me now is reporter Maya Dukmasova with Injustice Watch, the Chicago-based nonprofit journalism organization, which has just released its own extensive investigation into the lab. Maya, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very extensive report here, and a large portion of your report centers on another marijuana test at the lab that Ms. Bash involvement in creating and overseeing that test, and her expert testimony in the courtroom. So what are some of the highlights?
So there were two major issues with the testing at the lab. On the one hand, there was the approach to testing urine in DUI cannabis investigations, which purported to be able to show whether someone was high while driving based on their urine. And this is scientifically impossible because THC, the active drug compound that the Illinois DUI law says you have to find in people's blood or bodily fluids, THC is not actually found in urine. So the lab performed complicated scientific analysis in order to essentially convert the metabolites of THC, which show up in urine for days or weeks after last use, back into the parent drug, quantify that and then say this is how much THC the person had in their system at the time of driving. So that was one thing. And the second issue was what ABC7 had reported previously, which is that the lab's machines weren't really set up to tell the difference between Delta 9 THC, which is the thing prohibited by Illinois DUI law, and Delta 8 THC, which is not illegal and is a different compound. So in 2021, they appear to have found out that their machines are not set up to tell the difference, and then didn't do anything to fix the method. And the internal UIC investigation report confirms that this is what happened.
Didn't do anything to fix the method for years at
Correct.
that point. Right.
Continued testing, continued issuing lab reports. And in 2024, after the university shut down human testing at the lab for unrelated reasons, for financial reasons, essentially, not because of the faulty science happening there. In 2024, they ran a test again and saw, yep, indeed, our machines are not able to tell the difference between Delta 9 THC and Delta 8 THC, even though the Illinois DUI law is tied specifically to Delta 9. And essentially, they issued a letter to a bunch of state's attorney's offices saying, we had this problem going back this many years, potentially impacting test results, but they have not issued any amended lab reports or contacted a single defendant whose body fluids were tested to notify them that the results may have been inaccurate.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. What does this mean for those thousands and thousands of cases that are, in the court system right now or have been adjudicated even with test results that are called into question?
So it's unclear because no one even knows exactly how many cases there are, how many convictions there are. This would require a detailed data analysis that has to begin at the University of Illinois Chicago, because they're the ones that have all the lab reports with all the names of the people whose body fluids were tested. So defense attorneys who are working on trying to reverse wrongful convictions or investigate potentially wrongful convictions tied to the lab, they estimate that there are hundreds of people in the state who are still convicted based on the evidence from this lab. And you got to understand, most DUIs are misdemeanors. Most misdemeanor cases are resolved through plea deals. People hear that, oh, the lab report came in, it said that you were over the legal limit, and they take a plea and they move on with their lives. It's very, the maximum prison time for a misdemeanor case is a year. But you found one individual who is serving time for a felony DUI because of the deaths involved. I found another individual who is doing 31 years because he was actually prosecuted for murder and aggravated DUI based on the accident he caused when all the evidence pointed to the fact that he was having a psychotic break due to a mental health issue.
Right.
So it remains to be seen how many people exactly are still incarcerated or who are still carrying convictions on their record tied to this lab. But right now, the buck is stopping at the University of Illinois.
And finally, I mean, there are real questions out there still about oversight of the lab and any real meaningful oversight that could have stopped this or could stop this from happening again going forward.
Yeah, one of the shocking things in investigating this story is the basic total lack of forensic science oversight in our state. And Illinois is pretty typical for the United States. The only place that has actual forensics oversight in this country is Texas. But in Illinois, we have a forensic science commission that was created by Governor J.B. Pritzker a couple of years ago. And it is housed inside the Illinois State Police and doesn't have any actual power to investigate or discipline forensics labs.
And it's really
Labor Day weekend is full
unfortunate.
of fun, including
Whoops, because that report ended there, at least on the online version. So that's basically what we had for that report. It looked like there was a little bit more to that discussion. I would have loved to hear about oversight. If anybody has seen the full report and knows more about what they said there at the end, please drop your comment below. I'd love to learn more. We got some questions and comments in as we were going through this, and like I said, I wanted to drill down on some names that you may have noticed from the reporting. So somebody said, considering the differences between Delta 8, Delta 9, and Delta 11 made by the liver when consuming Delta 9 are not distinguishable by the metabolite given current methods. Yes, exactly. And that is what I broke down in episode 97 of the podcast, which I mentioned at the top of this show. Like I said, that was the first time, or I should say up until now, I've never heard anybody report on these details and how like the lab interprets things and what all of this means actually in practice. So I give a presentation. If you go to colememo.com and look up episode 97, you can watch that. It's episode 97, Illinois Cannabis Per Se Limit and Impossible Standard as Interpreted. I'll have that linked in the show notes. So if you're listening to this episode, it's episode 228. You can see episode 97 is linked right there at the top. And basically, in this report that we just watched by ABC7, they mentioned that something to the effect of complex science was performed on the urine, or on the biosamples, if you will. In the case of urine, which is what episode 97 was about, from what I understand, and from according to the court testimony that I read, the lab was performing electrolysis on the urine. So they were literally converting, I believe it was conjugated THC to free THC. But don't quote me on that because it's been a while since I had to learn all of those details and about how the body metabolizes THC. And I know some of your eyes may be glossing over right now, but it actually is super interesting because basically THC should not be in your urine unless, if I recall correctly, you're having some like major organ failure. For the most part, your body actually converts the THC into another form. And so you'll never actually have THC in your blood. And that is all that is all the more reason that these lab tests are flawed. So according to what I found. So we're gonna dig into more here. Thank you to the folks that are dropping comments. Christopher Brady, you are hilarious. So just to drill down into some names. So Jennifer Bash from the lab. Let's Google their name. Somebody brought this to my attention on the podcast in the past. If you look up Jennifer Bash Cannabis Advisory Board. So Jennifer Bash was the forensic toxicologist, and you can see that from one of the first results here. But if you go down here, you can see there's this listing for Cresco Yeltra. Cresco Yeltra, which Cresco, that sounds familiar, but let's look at it. So, and I saw Jennifer Bash's name on this. So if you click, yes, I'm over 21, I'm getting into Cresco Yeltra's website. And if you scroll down, you'll see Jennifer Bash's name here. And apparently she is the senior analytical forensic toxicologist specialist with the Analytical Testing Laboratory at the University of Illinois, Chicago College of Pharmacy, which sounds a lot like what we were just talking about, or what ABC7 was just talking about. She apparently at the time of this writing was working with the Illinois Department of Agriculture to help solidify the sampling and testing standards for the state's program. If you're wondering what Cresco Yeltra is, I'm going to click this icon here in the top left-hand corner, and it says that Cresco Yeltra is dedicated to providing the patients of Pennsylvania medical marijuana program with the highest quality, most precisely dosed medical marijuana products. Not trying to give them free advertising, but it's just interesting that apparently she has some, or had some, involvement in the cannabis industry. Just a little bit of a mention on Jennifer Bash. Another name that you may have seen in the reporting on this subject was Dr. Marilyn Hustis, and I'm Googling that name right now. And if you see, the top result is Dr. Marilyn Hustis on Smart Approaches to Marijuana's website. And from what I can gather, Dr. Marilyn Hustis is a part of, or at least works with, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which, if you didn't know, is a group that actually works to oppose cannabis legalization. Now, Christopher Brady just commented and said, "Ooh, Sam." The reason I find this notable is because even this woman from Sam, according to the testimony that I share in episode 97 that you can listen to at thecolememo.com, which is linked in the show notes, even this person from Sam, who does not believe cannabis should be legal, said, boy, what this lab from University of Illinois in Chicago is doing is I believe she said something to the effect of not something I've ever seen done before. Which I found notable. I found that very notable to share. So if you go back and listen to episode 97, you'll hear me read the testimony from this person. And like I say, I think that all of those things are super, super notable to mention with regard to that entire topic. So folks, I've been talking about this for a moment. Drop your comments below. I'd like to know what you think about this subject. Like I say, it's really nice to see this reporting. If you'd like to check out the report that we watched in this episode, I'll have that linked in the show notes. Definitely check out episode 97 for some more information. And Christopher Brady says, go wash your mouth out after talking about Sam. Well, folks, please drop your comments in. We're going to keep the show rolling. We've got some things to talk about with regard to the rescheduling of cannabis. We're going to be getting an update from our friends in Texas and just a little bit more. All of that right here in this episode of The Cole Memo.